Well, thank you so much, Max, for joining us for this fireside. We appreciate everything you've done for the Black Blockchain Summit and continue to do to inspire all of us. And just wanted to welcome you to this year's conference where we're really focusing on this particular fireside on Satoshi is Black, Reparations and Revolutions, and really want to have an opportunity to kind of share some of your thoughts and some of the things that you've seen over this journey of Bitcoin as it relates to liberation and making sure we address these issues of banksters and oppression.
Yeah, Sinclair, my pleasure to be back with you and looking forward to a good chat.
Awesome. So I think the first thing, Satoshi is Black. I know in talking to you and trying to actually kind of ascertain, some of the ethos and some of the kind of like spiritual connection that so often gets lost in some of these techie talks. Can you kind of, go back to some of your origin stories as it relates to Bitcoin and the origins and how it actually manifests in the world today as well as it started?
Well, Sinclair, everything comes from Black. Black is what was before the multiverse. It was Black. And then we had our consciousness awakening. We had our multiverse became our universe, and we are living on planet Earth. And in Africa, we saw the beginning of humans. And in America, the whole cultural experience refers back to the Black experience, really. And it's in that Black experience, the phrase, "I am a revolutionary," was a big part of the emancipation that is ongoing. And but those words were expressed and those words were articulated, and that poetry was put out into the mainstream. And Bitcoin is Black because it reflects the need for emancipation, and in this case, emancipation from fiat money. And I said back in 2011, when I first started talking about Bitcoin when it was $1, I said this was a natural for the Black community in America to embrace Bitcoin because it separates money from state, and to be emancipated from the state. And many would argue that America is primarily a white supremacist state.
All right. Tell it, Max. Tell it, Max.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I'm saying. So this is a way to divorce oneself from the state. And it's been very difficult to do that because the state has always had a monopoly on money since the beginning of money, even with gold, which is, you could say, not directly tied to a state, but nevertheless, the state is very much involved because of the sheer weight of gold. It needs to be stored, and those storage facilities are surrounded by guards and military, and right back to the state. So not even gold separates money from state. Only Bitcoin separates money from state. And I've been talking to Sinclair about this a long time. We're good friends through the Bitcoin community, and this is a way for the Black community to do something they've been doing for a while. There's always been instances of Black Wall Street and Black empowerment, Black communities, and this has always met a wall of resistance from the state. And so now with Bitcoin, that push toward independence and true emancipation is truly possible. And then we saw in the last couple of years, Bitcoin and Black America. Of course, Isaiah Jackson's book came out. I think it's brilliant. It really makes the case quite clearly what can be done with Bitcoin. He mentions me in the first few pages. I am listed in the book as a notable white man, which I think is it's going to be my epitaph. It'll be
John Brown. You're a John Brown awardee. You're the first John Brown awardee, and there's not a white man that's done so much to be clear about what the state is. And you received our first Black Blockchain Summit John Brown Award.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to thank you for receiving that and holding that mantle and consistently being that beacon of light.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. It's we're all in America, and we're Americans, and there's a lot to be gleaned, to be taken from the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It's a great document. And but it's not a finished document. There's plenty more to do. We can, and Bitcoin is really it expresses the ideals of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in a more perfect way. And so you and I and everyone in this community are going to keep working on this, because we're in the same place, man. We're in the same place now.
Yeah, and I kind of want to even take some of that journey, because you went back to 2011, and just like Isaiah, you you also exposed me to my first. I wouldn't know a Bitcoin from a bit hole if it wasn't for your Keiser Report show and the things you were doing, and especially around, this is doing the Occupy movement. I became very sensitized to some of these things, and I think you've met so many people and engaged so many brilliant minds that don't make it to the mainstream. One of our participants this year that you helped help me get acquainted with, John Perkins. We just had the passing of David Graeber. Are there any things? I mean, you talk to so many people, and when we're talking about the Black Blockchain Summit, and we're trying to leverage this technology for liberation of the global Black community, I think what you've been able to do in such a unique way is leverage the minds of folks in ways that they could actually empower us. And I'm saying that again because I just even looked at one of your old episodes of Dave Graeber. I know y'all just did a tribute to him. Are there any things from either, David Graeber with the debt? I got his book, I've been reading it, and it really starts to talk about demystifying. So often we hear about the so-called Industrial Revolution that did it, even though they don't talk about how it was done with the backs of enslaved human beings. They talk about barter, and then Dave Graeber kind of basically dismisses that whole concept that people may have never actually did those things the way. What has, with your journey of touching so many of the most amazing minds, what are some of the things that you would take away from those like a David Graeber that would be helpful to some of our listeners or participants? And of course, I thank God you have an archive of so many of these treasures that if you hadn't probably interviewed them, some of the things that they've said would have been so difficult. And you just basically pulled these people and curated it so much information. What can you do to share with us?
Well, I draw a lot of inspiration from children, because they are basically just fresh in their thinking, and they don't have any of the prejudices and the biases, and they look at things completely with wonderment. And that's the place we all want to be. Once we start to codify and we start to philosophize and categorize and specialize, we dilute knowledge, and we dilute our experience as human beings. Whereas children, they just synthetically take it all in. And the lesson I learned is that every day is completely new and every day is completely fresh. The thing about Bitcoin is that it gives us a chance to be free. Everybody can be free from the state, free from a lot of the problems that come with fiat money, which is the system we live in now. And with that freedom comes multiple and infinite possibilities, and everyone gets to travel their own path. I mean, there's a lot of people I've talked to, a lot of people I've read, a lot of people I've met, and but at the end of the day, we want to go back to the place we were before all that, just completely open to the real. Just be open. And so you see it in children, and we can achieve that sense of openness as well by sometimes it would require washing away everything we think we know. How much we don't know is so much greater than what we do know. It's by a huge factor, tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of percentage of what we don't know still compared to what we know. We know almost nothing, except that we have an inherent desire to be free. You know, we want to be free to roam. We want to be free to take in life, unfiltered, uncensored. We just want to make conscious contact with something spiritual. That we're all spiritual. So that's getting back to Bitcoin. It's just it really has a way of changing people's consciousness, because once you start to accumulate Bitcoin, you're now flipping over from being a consumer to being a saver. So you're changing your behavior from being somebody who's thinking about consuming all the time and invariably going into debt to being somebody who's maybe not thinking about consuming all the time, somebody who's saving. And once you start saving, you achieve individual sovereignty, you achieve self-sovereignty and self-confidence in a lot of ways. You get closer to who you are, yourself. It's about self-knowledge, self-actualization, awareness, because you're not under that constant pressure of consuming and being in debt and living in a fiat money system. And so maybe Alan Watts, Alan Watts is somebody who I read as a teenager who led a big impression on me. You know, he wrote a book called The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, The Taboo Against Knowing Yourself, right? He was part of back in the 60s and 70s, there was a big movement in America embracing some more Eastern type philosophies. And Alan Watts was more of an Eastern Zen type philosopher. And this made a big impression on me, that the empty space is as important as the space. I remember a quote from Miles Davis. You know, they were asking him about his music, and he was said, you know, something to the effect of my best performances, you know, or my best musical expression is when I'm playing the rests, right? Are the absence of sound, right? That you know, he said that was some of his greatest work was when he had absolutely no notes whatsoever. And you know, this is something that I think Bitcoin can help us understand, because you remove that hyper pressure to consume and to conform and to be liked, and which means to be less than. And what we all want to be is who we are. And a lot of times that means just sitting down and doing nothing, just meditating on that for a moment and getting in touch with yourself. And you can't do that if you're in debt, hyper consuming, and lack confidence because you don't have enough likes on Facebook. If you just walk away from that.
Wow. Now, I think the hard part, and I think you make it maybe look a little easier, is that so many of our, you know, folks who are just getting into Bitcoin, or some of the folks who are been in the space as far as crypto or even technology, some of us are still caught up in the rat race. And I think what you just discussed is, you know, I'm not going to say it was a nirvana or some type of trying to keep along with your, you know, Eastern perspective, but how does the regular person who's getting into Bitcoin, how does the person with the startup and being driven, how do you create a balance? And I'm bringing this up because, again, you've had so much success and insight, and you kept that character of what you just expressed, you live it. How can you connect us or help us connect to what you're talking about as at least as a viable approach? I don't know. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but what you just described, you know, is not what we were told when we were in college what success is. Even our parents might not even say what you just described is success. But in so many ways, by your example, not even if you'd even said these words, just by your example of how you've pursued your craft, it exhibits that. How can more of us, I don't care if I'm a baker, like besides of course taking Bitcoin, how can we more embody some of the points you just made, do you think, practically as just a person?
Well, you mentioned success and how to be successful. And nobody knows really what success means unless they've gone through hardship. and extreme hardship. So in other words, to know success, the only way you can know success is you must first go through complete and utter failure. The worse failure, the better, because then you know what success is. You can't, having never really failed and failed miserably, you can read about how to succeed, but it doesn't resonate with you, your soul and your spirit, because it just glances off of you, and you may go your whole life without really knowing either failure or success. So the way to achieve ultimate failure and miserable failure is you've got to take risks, number one. And so taking risks means that you might fail. Now, uniquely in the United States, in America, failure is not necessarily carries the same stigma that it does in Europe. In Europe, and I've lived in Europe for 20 years, if you fail once, it can really screw up your whole life, because the entire culture is based around government and the civil service. There's not really an entrepreneurial culture in Europe per se, as we know it here in the US. So we're lucky to be in the US, and we're lucky that we can fail, because once we fail here, we have a chance to try again and keep trying. And once you fail, and once you have a taste, therefore, of what success means in the context of failure, then the second big part of it is that anyone who has really failed and really felt terrible knows that there is only one way out, and that is one baby step at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time. And in the case of Bitcoin, this translates into, you can buy Bitcoin and own Bitcoin for as little as $1 or $5. If that's where you start, that's the beginning of your journey. If you have come through failure and you are hungry for success and you own $5 of Bitcoin, your entire mood is going to change from I'm dealing with failure to I'm now living in success. It can happen with $5. And if you do that consistently, step by step by step, over a period of time, a year, 5 years, 10 years, you will arrive at at a place you really want to be at. It's interesting to put this, I guess, into an analogy. If you're in an ocean vessel, a ship, and you want to cross the ocean, when you start that journey, if you just change your direction by 1 degree, by the time you get across that ocean, you're going to be in a much different place.
Go ahead. Good point. Yes, sir. I think what you're just, helping give us a context is that this space is more than just transactional. There is a spiritual part of it that I think only comes from being rooted and experience it over time and being able to share that. I think even with my individual entrepreneurial journey with you and your wife advising us on taking that leap with originally with BitMari. Again, so many things of coming up with, Satoshi is Black and inspiring us to make sure that we continued our journey with the Black Blockchain Summit. As it relates to the greater society right now, in this particular mood where it's an election season in the United States, people are looking at so many issues in the Black community. We've seen so many people get their just due as reparations or treaties signed with different groups. One of the conversations, and again, someone that you featured, Tariq Nasheed, we even had Tariq come to Zimbabwe. He came and visited us. We were doing our projects with women farmers and the things that you helped out with Start Join. And definitely, I'm in the Dominican Republic. I don't know if you remember, with your platform, we were able to raise money for Haitian folks who were in the Dominican Republic who were actually getting deported. And with the funds we raised with Start Join, we were able to give them visas to over 30 families, and they could at least decide to leave with dignity. I just want to give a little shout out on that. How do you see, as we talk about, again, the current political climate, current economic climate, again, as a Black community, and this is not just in the United States, when I look at the colonial masters, after the Nazi Germany did the wicked things to Jewish European folks, they had a Nuremberg trial where people were held accountable. They disrupted the whole supply chain that the Nazis had. They disbanded it. but no one ever went to prison for colonialism. Nobody went to prison for slavery. It was legal. And now there's still a disparity because those who benefited from it never had to be held accountable, and those who were not afforded the opportunity to have that access. And now we have a technology like Bitcoin that could actually give us access to ways that aren't wedded to that system that has been vested in so much of disparity and injustice. Do you see the use of Bitcoin as a way to at least address these injustices? Or again, I don't want to put these in your mouth, but I'm trying to paint a picture like how, when people are so concerned about this current climate and fearful, how can we look for leveraging tools like Bitcoin to help get us one baby step at a time out of these situations?
Right. So you're talking about political justice and political inequality, political inequity. And historically, there's been two ways to resolve this type of crisis: peacefully and not peacefully. And now with Bitcoin, we have kind of a variation on the theme of peace and peacefulness. So just to roll back here for a second. So, this does play into the conversation about reparations. And, we've been talking about reparations for a while. In my view, if the federal government can print 10, 20, 30 trillion dollars to bail out Wall Street, then they can certainly print 10, 15, 20 trillion dollars to create reparations for the Black community. It doesn't seem like that shouldn't be it shouldn't even be a debate. Just do it, right? Because you're putting, first of all, it would be better for the economy because you're putting 10, 15, 20 trillion dollars into actual consumers' hands who are going to spend it in their local communities. And it would immediately increase GDP in America, revitalize America, and it would be a smart economic move. By just giving that printed money to Wall Street, we know from looking at the chart that tracks money velocity, the rate at which money is going through the economy, we know it doesn't move. So it just stays in Wall Street. They're not doing anything with it. They're literally, you're giving guys like Warren Buffett a few $trillion who just literally sticks it in a drawer and forgets about it, where you might as well just give it to the Black community because it would enter the economy immediately and we'd have real economic growth. But, we're not going to see that happening because to use Tariq Nasheed's frame of we live in a white supremacist, the guiding principle of the government, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't use that frame to kind of understand what's happening politically. I don't see these types of outcomes. So that brings us back to Bitcoin. And as I've been saying since 2011, Black community with Bitcoin, it's unconfiscatable, which is a key concept of Bitcoin if you're Black in America, because, wealth, look at the 2008 crisis, all those homes that were Black owned in New Orleans and also after the hurricane, I believe Hurricane Katrina, right? There was a wholesale thievery of all those homes by mortgage bankers who had made faulty and illegal loans to begin with. They repossessed all those homes. It was the biggest seizure of Black wealth since Civil War days. This was an enormously tragic imposition by bankers on the Black community. But so with Bitcoin is unconfiscatable. That's very important. If you're living in a white supremacist environment, you don't want your shit stolen by whitey, right? That's an important factor. So that's number one.
All right, Mag, you can't say, I don't think we can curse. I don't think we can curse on here, man. You say shit, they're going to,
Oh, okay. I retract that statement. And I apologize for speaking, in a way that would sully the bon ami, which is present here at the moment. But my point is that
yes,
hopefully my point was gotten across. And
yes.
So second of all, so you have the separation of state and money, which is very important. You have a community that's is unified. I mean, the black community is unified, right? They're ready to move as a block. So why not just say, we're going to make Bitcoin our currency. It's going to be Bitcoin is black. We're just going to make it our currency. We're going to trade using Bitcoin. And we're going to stop using the US dollar. Why not do that? Do it now.
Right.
I mean, other countries are going to start doing it. The black community in America can secede from the fiat money today by saying we're not going to be using fiat money anymore. We're only going to use Bitcoin. You know, Tariq Nasheed, you know, we got to get him on this because he's kind of resistant to it for whatever reasons, you know, but let's try to organize this.
Now, I think you just drove home a great point. Even when we talk about the Tulsa massacre, where black wealth was acquired and it was bombed and destroyed, the fact that, again, being able to protect your community, which is one of the things that enslavement, colonial masters, the first thing they did, they took your ability to actually have sovereignty, to actually control your community, your family, your environment, and to give you something that can't be confiscated, that's immutable, that allows you to have that level of protection from the state or from any bad actors trying to harm you. I think we don't have those conversations contextually like that. Again, I think some of the conversations that we're trying to create with the Black Blockchain Summit is connecting some of the real world concepts you just posed with actual solutions that can be scaled and leveraged with technology. And I think with amazing brothers like you referenced, like Tariq Nasheed, and even traditional leaders in the Black community or thought leaders in the Black community, there's often a disconnect between that amazing insight and how to leverage technology to do it. And I've even seen it in Africa, where you have brilliant people on the continent, but the folks who are in control of research and development, unfortunately, are by and large Europeans. And even in the African American community, oftentimes when we try to connect with technology, the outcomes of technology are not centered around issues of 500 years of oppression. We might have somebody who comes up with a new app that does a better way to figure out if your dog is happy or sad or something. So I think what you're saying, in connecting these real world issues to real world solutions that don't require us to wait for November 3rd or any other election day. These are things that we could do for ourselves in the consensus, and again, using Bitcoin, and we, under our own consensus, decide that we can work with each other and transact with each other in a way that allows us to have sovereignty without waiting for someone to agree to it. I think that's an amazing point.
Right. You know, Isaiah Jackson, who wrote Bitcoin of Black America, he makes the point that he is now reached the end of his patience as a Black man in America. He's not waiting for justice. He's just opting out with Bitcoin and just saying, you know, I'm opting out. I'm not waiting around anymore. And I think that's the right approach. And with Bitcoin, it allows you to peacefully opt out of a white supremacist oriented political system in the United States. And you talk about Africa. In Nigeria, 30% of the day-to-day commerce is now Bitcoin enabled. So in Nigeria, they moved from store of value to medium of exchange to now unit of account. So Nigeria could become the Bitcoin powerhouse in the world. You know, it's a huge economy. And if they keep going the way it's going with Bitcoin, that's going to be the center of gravity for global Bitcoin is going to be Nigeria. And then
go ahead.
The African diaspora, right? African Black community around the world is going to be like, they're going to pick up on that. And they're like, yeah, you know, we get it. And that's going to ripple and just like, because it's going to make sense. It's going to just like say, yeah, well, you know, we're just tired of all the nonsense, man. I mean, how much more of this nonsense, right? And the problem is that the state always comes back in a violent, coercive way. That's the problem. The problem is violence from the state violence in the state prison system, which is an extension of slavery, is the prison industrial complex. It's an extension of Jim Crow. It's just the state rounding up and imprisoning black people because they're racist. That's the bottom line. So let's opt out, man. Just opt out with Bitcoin. It's peaceful. Just like, I don't take your stinking fiat money anymore. I'm not dealing in that filth. I just want Bitcoin. I just want peace. Leave me alone. I want peace.
I'm just doing a little like kind of tangential. Being in the blockchain Bitcoin space as a startup, looking at this KYC, anti-money laundering laws, it wasn't until I really got into it and I realized how they talk about drugs. I'm 51 years old, so my generation was the one they said was the crack epidemic. You know, AIDS got big, just all that coming of age. And I looked at the fact that you can't even move that large sums of money without the state knowing. Like JoJo and Ray Ray on the street corner, there's no way in the world that they're moving hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars without the state, and especially with something like cocaine that's grown, literally harvested in South America. Most of the folks in my neighborhood didn't even have passports or visas. No one had a passport visa to actually participate in this thing. And when you start talking about how we can disconnect ourselves, I think sometimes we buy into things, these myths of some super drug dealer that's actually in control of this, where the state, there's no way the state could even allow that type of movement unless they were a party to it. So I just think, I mean, the point you're making, I think, you know, when we really think it through, it makes sense. And I guess the next step in it, as we come to this awareness, and I think Isaiah really, I think his book, and I think we have his book on our website as a reference guide. But as people become awakening and system becomes awakened, our friends become awakened, what would you say if you were going to say, hey, man, these are my 3 things that, look, as you become more aware of what's going on and how to make sure that these are the 3 steps I would try to take? Are there any steps you would take as a recommendation to those who are just becoming awakening to these truths and how they could actually make a difference in their own lives?
Right. So first, just to kind of roll it back for a second. And, you know, I think that there's an old saying, he who has the gold makes the rules. But I think that's going to be changing now. He who has the Bitcoin makes the rules. So one way to achieve political parity in America is if the Black community were to have, you know, $1 trillion or more worth of Bitcoin in aggregate, that means they're going to be making some rules. And that gives a lot of political power just by the sheer size of the economic footprint of being associated with that many Bitcoin. As I said in 2011, and it was quoted in Isaiah Jackson's book, if the Black community focused on acquiring Bitcoin back in 2011 when it was $1, by 2020, they could buy the white community. Now,
go ahead.
A lot of people were saying that that's maybe not the best way to phrase that, but the point is that imagine if, in fact, the whole Black community started buying Bitcoin at $1, and here in 2020, you know, the whole Bitcoin's worth, what, 240 billion. I mean, you could say Black community could have 20, 30 billion of that, which is a nice little war chest, you know, to get things done politically. Because we know in politics in America, it's all about the laws that are bought, right? The laws are bought. They're not made. People buy laws. You know, they buy them, you know, to suit their interests. So that's where it's done. It's done in the cash register. So that would be a nice war chest to have, 20 or 30 billion to go down to Washington and make and buy some laws that we want, right? That would be nice. So to get back to your other question in terms of, okay, how do you start this process? And the best way to get back to my earlier point is that you've got to be willing to take risk and fail. Most people I gave away a lot of Bitcoin in 2011. I gave away thousands of Bitcoin in 2011. And almost everyone I gave those Bitcoin to lost them. right? But they didn't, unless you have the experience of shelling out your own money and taking possession of this thing and being responsible, because if you lose that private key, you're lost your money for good, forever. You're never getting it back, right? Unless you take that action and take that responsibility, you will not know what this means. You won't know what any of this means. That's the first step you have to take. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to take a risk, and you have to be willing to lose, because you're the only one responsible now. Can't go to the government, can't go to your friends, can't go to your family. Once you lose that private key, it's over. You know, the story today, some guy has a private key worth $700 million, and he's asking Google to tap into their artificial intelligence quantum computer capability to help him remember the password, right? I mean, how bad does that guy feel right now? It's never going to happen. He's got $700 million that is now lost forever, and that'll be worth $10 billion soon enough, right? I mean, you got to have that experience. You got to take a risk. You got to fail. And once you fail, then you know what it is to succeed. But you can never know what it is to succeed unless you first fail.
Well, Max, I really appreciate everything you've done for us as a conference, what you've done for the culture of Bitcoin. I think your civility, I think one of the things you've also taught is, you know, you're very direct about your perspective, but there's a level of, you know, you call folks banksters, and look, I never met Jamie Dimon, but I think he's a no good bastard. But as a whole, you know, your approach to humanity and us as people on this journey is always so thoughtful. And you and your wife even being the example of how we as people can work together. I just think it's, you know, if we don't say thank you, we for all those that haven't, who've thought about thanking Max, you know, again, Max, with your style, thanking you could also be kind of like a weird thank you anyway, but just thanking you for being you and sharing so much and caring so much. And again, you've taken part of your life to do this. And, you know, there's a risk in being that vulnerable and that open, but you've done so much for so many of us.
Is there? I mean, so my education, as I've said in the past, when I was going to New York University back in 1979, I moved to 145th Street and Broadway is where I was living, which is Harlem, you know, it's Sugar Hill. And I lived uptown for 4 years. And I became known as, and I'm going to use a curse word here. I hope your audience does not, you know, get offended. But okay. I became known in the hood as the crazy ass white motherfucker that Reaganomics forgot. That was kind of like my nickname. Now, what I learned is that to survive in a situation like that, and it is a question of survival, is you've got to be authentic, because the street can sniff out bullshit fast, and that's dangerous. So this is the basis of my education when I was going to college. Is not what I was learning in the classroom down in Greenwich Village. It was what I was learning uptown by knowing and understanding that with the second I'm on that street, I've got to be authentic with everybody all the time. Otherwise, I'm at risk of getting, you know, my head crushed in a real violent way. You know, because especially in the late 70s and early 80s, that was a violent place to be. We had 3,000 murders a year in New York. It was the beginning of the Colombian invasion and crack cocaine, and you'd hear gunshots all day long uptown. And it was a dangerous place. And that was my lesson. And that's my lesson going forward. You know, people come to me and they say, I'm curious about this. How do I do this? What's going on here? It's got to be authentic. Just be authentically who you are. If you don't know who you are, then sit down, shut up, and meditate on that until you do know who you are. No one's going to tell you who you are. Only you can tell you who you are. That goes all the way back to Socrates. Know thyself. Okay? That's what I'm saying.
All right. Well, Max, thank you. That was to say white motherfucker and Socrates. We'll take that and we'll call that the Black Blockchain Summit 2020 coming to you live. Thank you so much. And with that, we're wrapping it up and till we meet again.
Yeah, we'll see you soon, Sinclair.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Max.
Thanks for having me.